Inflation. A single word, but a vast memory. It is the slow pulse of civilization, rising, falling, never still. We measure it in prices, but it measures us, our greed, our fear, our forgetfulness. Each generation believes it has mastered the tide. Each discovers eventually that the sea was only calm. This analysis follows that rhythm, a 72-year wave, from the ashes of war to the algorithms of modern finance. We will trace how policy, power, and human desire interlock, how comfort becomes confidence, and confidence becomes carelessness. The data you'll see are not just numbers. They are the echo of choices, of promises made, debts enforced, and memories erased. 6 acts, 70 years. One question that refuses to fade. Why does inflation never die? Before the quiet, steady rise of prices from 1948 to 1964, came a moment when the world itself was repriced, when the end of war gave birth to the cost of peace. The guns fall silent, but the numbers tell the scale of ruin. Europe's industrial equipment survives more than expected. Even in heavily bombed Germany and Italy, fixed industrial capital grew during the war. But production has collapsed. Transport networks lie shattered, railways splintered, and factories silent. Across the continent, output falls to fractions of pre-war levels. From London to Leningrad, cities lie in ash as currencies are rendered worthless. In 1946, food rations in parts of occupied Germany fall to 1,200 calories per day. Some regions receive barely 1,000. Tens of millions are displaced, and the global economy is broken. Yet the damage is uneven. Across the Atlantic, America stands apart, its homeland untouched, its farmland fertile, its industrial machine still warm from war. In 1945, the United States accounts for roughly half of global industrial output and holds 3/4 of the world's monetary gold. While other nations rebuild, America's momentum only grows. Now, before the Marshall Plan, before the Cold War, there was a single hotel in New Hampshire. July of 1944 found 700 delegates from 44 nations gathered at Bretton Woods. The war that would later lead to arguably the most prosperous time in the United States is not yet won, but these men are already designing what comes after. 3 weeks of negotiation produce a new monetary order. The dollar, backed by gold at $35 an ounce, would become the world's anchor. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are born into existence, a system built on American strength. 3 years later, Secretary of State George Marshall would stand at Harvard and offer Europe a lifeline, $13 billion, the equivalent of $150 billion today. The logic was straightforward. Rebuild your customers, and they would buy your goods. American factories would keep running, and Europe would owe its recovery to Washington. By 1949, that bet was paying off. Western European industrial output had climbed back to pre-war levels. The continent was feeding itself again, and its factories were running. But the new order came with obligations. In April of 1949, 12 nations signed the North Atlantic Treaty, binding themselves to mutual defense. What had begun as economic rescue was becoming military alliance. And then came Korea. June of 1950 found North Korean forces crossing the 38th parallel, and within weeks, America was at war again. Defense spending surged. Factories that had been making refrigerators were making munitions. Inflation climbed toward 9%. This posed a problem. Since the war, the Federal Reserve had been obligated to buy government bonds at fixed rates, effectively printing money to keep Washington's borrowing costs low. It was a wartime arrangement that no one had bothered to end, and now, with prices rising, it threatened to undo everything Bretton Woods had built. The man who would break that arrangement was William McChesney Martin, a 34-year-old assistant Treasury Secretary with no particular reputation for defiance. On March 4th of 1951, he brokered what became known as the Treasury-Fed Accord, a short document that freed the central bank to raise interest rates without the president's permission. Truman, who had expected Martin to be an ally, appointed him Fed chairman anyway. Martin promptly raised rates. Years later, the two crossed paths on a street in Manhattan. Truman had one word for him: traitor. By the summer of 1953, inflation had fallen below 1%. The Korean armistice was signed in July. The system that Bretton Woods had created and that Martin had defended remained intact. Inflation settled near 2% a year, not zero, but close enough that it barely registered. $1 saved in 1952 would still buy 90 cents worth of goods in 1960. Families could plan, businesses could invest. Banks could lend at fixed rates for 30 years and know roughly what those payments would be worth. This was the work of the Federal Reserve. William McChesney Martin, the man who had brokered the Treasury-Fed Accord, now sat as chairman. His job, as he famously described it, was to take away the punch bowl just as the party got going. When the economy ran hot, he raised interest rates. When it cooled, he lowered them. The goal was not to eliminate inflation, but to keep it predictable, invisible. And for most Americans, it was invisible. A loaf of bread cost about 18 cents. A gallon of gasoline, 29. Year after year, these prices barely moved. Workers could negotiate wages knowing they would hold their value. Savings accounts paid 3% interest, and that 3% paid well. The dollar was tied to gold at $35 an ounce, and other currencies were tied to the dollar. It was a system built on trust, and the trust was holding. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. America's gold reserves had begun to decline. Foreign nations were accumulating dollars faster than America was accumulating gold. The question no one wanted to ask: what happens when the world holds more dollars than Fort Knox holds gold? For now, confidence was enough. By 1960, inflation had been tame for so long that a new generation could not remember it any other way. These were Americans who had never seen prices double in a year, never watched their savings evaporate, never experienced the panic of a currency losing its meaning. To them, stable prices were not an achievement. They were simply how the world worked, and in a sense, they were right. Inflation in 1961 was 1.1%, in 1962, 1.2%, and in 1963, 1.3%. Year after year, the line barely moved. The Federal Reserve had become so good at its job that most people forgot it existed. This forgetting had consequences. Politicians began to see low inflation not as something to protect, but as something to exploit. If prices were stable, why not spend more? If the economy could grow without overheating, why not push harder? Lyndon Johnson inherited this logic when he assumed the presidency in November of 1963. He wanted to build a great society: Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid to education, a war on poverty. These were vast commitments. They would cost billions. But with inflation at 1%, the pressure to pay for them felt distant. The Federal Reserve watched and worried. Martin knew that government spending, if large enough, could overwhelm even the most careful monetary policy. He knew that inflation, once it started, was hard to stop. But raising interest rates meant slowing the economy, and slowing the economy meant angering the president. For 2 decades, the Fed had been independent. It had earned that independence by keeping prices stable. But independence is only as strong as the will to use it.